how can we create religious leaders and leaders who can actually address that question, that are able to relate with each other across boundaries that normally divide us, that are able to move together towards questions of justice, peace, and the healing of the earth. So that's the big thing that we're trying to raise. And in doing so, we feel that these leaders will begin to understand how to relate with people who are different from us, but also how to build power in order to enact whatever questions of legislation or community activism that is needed in order to get things done.
And I'm just being the devil's advocate here, as if there needs to be more advocacy for devilry. Why couldn't you just make a seminary?
I think seminaries can do that. I think that seminaries have, as we've been talking, seminaries have a particular sort of a restriction that is there because of the variety of the histories that they have, the theological positions that they have. They can't move beyond what the church usually, if they are a confessionally oriented seminary, they can't move beyond what the confession or the church allows them to move. And so there are certain levels of restriction that seminaries have to work on. The thing is that for us, we don't have that because we are sort of an independent agency that is comprising several seminaries and an ecumenical organization that actually cuts across the denominational boundaries. So, which makes it possible for us to be a little more agile than seminaries in order to make that work. So I hope that we will be a good resource for seminaries in order to make some of that work.
Great. If you're not training people to do classical parish or pulpit-based ministry, who are you training them to minister to? And how are you training them to minister?
Well, some of them are for church-based ministry. So let me make an analogy here. For a long time, I worked in the ecumenical movement. I've been in the National Council of Churches as Associate General Secretary. In New York, I was in the World Council of Churches as Director for Interreligious Dialogue there. So I understand churches, I understand religious communities. And wherever you go in the world, religious communities are ubiquitous. You go to a little village or a large city, they are all over the place. I mean, we know this, we see this. In some sense, they are the most organized entity in the world. I mean, people gather in groups of 20 or 20,000, about once a week, most of them. And one person gets up in front of them and says, "This is what is God's will for you." And most people try to follow that. Now imagine, we are the ones who are training that one person. Imagine if 1% of those would actually work towards justice and peace in the world.
Amen. Oh, you beat me.
Hey, that's the new 1%, right?
Yeah.
I can imagine it.
Now, see, so in some sense, it is not about saying how do we minister to a parish, but it is how do we think about the big picture of God's vision for the world, and how do we motivate our congregations in order to engage in that? How do we train these new pastors who are coming on and religious leaders? By the way, this is not only for Christian communities, but it is also for Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Jews and all of the others who gather in communities. All of those are an opportunity for us to engage.
And so I'm kind of distinctly hearing you're not anti-seminary. That's pretty clear.
No.
But you also need to function kind of somehow supplemental to it. It's not sufficient to just be another one. There's a niche aside seminaries. Is that accurate for your position?
We're creating a niche here, and there's something that we said to ourselves. I told you earlier that we went through a strategic planning process, which is a really rigorous, difficult process. If any of you have been through that, you know. But we focused on one thing that is distinctive about what we do, and that is the method of contextual theology, where we say that is really not just a subject separate from theology, that is practical theology or sending people into churches, but it is really a method of theological, the discipline of theology. So here's how you hear what God is speaking through the people who are in the margins. That's the special thing that we bring to the conversation. But the point is that niche is necessary not only for seminaries and churches, but also for the variety of others in the marketplace. So for example, business people need to understand how to relate to the margins. Nobody does in the business world. The issue is that community organizations, advocacy organizations, you all need to listen to what is going on in the margins in order that they may do their work more effectively. Fact of the matter is, in the margins, there's the most creative, the most controversial, the most aggressive kind of organizing that is happening, if you listen to that. And we are missing that just because of who we are in this room. You know, I mean, we are sort of the, Alice said we are the 1% in the global sense, but we are sort of middle class people just by the fact that we are middle class people. We don't have access to the conversation that is going on in poor communities around the country or around the world. And that's the question that we have to ask.
Thank you. Will, you can stay up here, please, but can we give him a round of applause here? And actually, I think this is a great transition. Will you join us up here? Will, are you around? Great. I feel like it's a good transition. I don't know if Will does.
Oh, I felt like it was so smooth, Kelly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so I have a revelation here. I feel like I'm on Maury Povich a little bit. I often teach Walter Wink. Does anyone else teach Walter Wink? I first learned Walter Wink from this man, and he doesn't know that. But I studied with him in Philadelphia because I was teaching Quakerism at Pendle Hill, which is a Quaker retreat center, and someone was like, "You gotta go meet this Will O'Brien guy. He's teaching a gospel that would actually change politics." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And so I have a debt to pay to you, and so do my students. Or I'll tell them to complain to you if it's a problem. But the question I have for you, Will, is, yeah, we can pass that back and forth. There's other mics, but you mentioned today that part of what you call yourself is a people seminary, and that mostly what you're doing is working with a diverse population of people, reading Bible so that it might actually matter to those lives. Can you talk to us a little bit about who, like if I was to video camera what it is that's called the People Seminary, who's there and what brings them there?
It's could be anybody. I mean, we'll announce a class and 8 to 18, 20 people will join around the table. Some of them are veterans of the Alternative Seminary, some have just heard about it and they want to come for the first time. We're diverse in most areas, including theological traditions. You got your Catholics, you got your Quakers, you got your recovering Catholics, you got recovering evangelicals, you got the whole blend.
Recovering Quakers, though?
I got some of those actually. So people who just barely have had any church experience. We got people who have PhDs in New Testament, people who barely practice the thing open and aren't even sure who Moses is, and that's really exciting right there. The age difference is really amazing. Theological backgrounds are amazing. The kinds of experiences are quite fun and enriching to hear from each other. We are weak on the racial diversity. We're struggling with our social location, and often that forces us to kind of look at who we are. But it's open to everyone. We have some done some interfaith classes, and some intentionally interfaith, some unintentionally interfaith, which is even more fun. But basically, people come, I think, because they're looking for something deeper. They're trying to recover from wounds of the church, and see, is there a possibility for this Jesus and this Bible that they still don't want to let go of? A lot of them come because they're passionate about following Jesus, and they're concerned about the brokenness of the world and their own place with it. in it, and I think the key is, we want to know Jesus, we want to follow Jesus in our time, in our world, given who we are, given who our social context is.
So how do you understand what theological education is in this context? You said earlier today it might not quite fit because you're not in higher education, and I'll say you're not in higher education as an industry. But do you think you're doing theological education? Not just you, but do you think that the alternative seminary is doing theological education?
Theology is talking about God. We're all theologians, and whereas this is not institutional, it is structured. We gather around table, we're going to do this for 9 weeks, here's our text, and so there is an education process to it, but we set a tone at the beginning that the Spirit is among us and between us and through us, and hopefully we're all growing, so some education is happening, but I always like to stress part of what we're doing is, in fact, intellectual, scholarly work, and we're borrowing some of the good work you folks do and taking it down to the grassroots, and if it works, it works, if it doesn't, it doesn't. They're just tools, but important tools. But if we are using our minds, it is we're loving God with our whole minds, which has to be integrated with the other forms of loving God, with our whole hearts and our whole hands and our bodies, and so there's intellectual work, but sometimes there's screaming and yelling, and sometimes there's crying. So it's, I think, a deeper and richer sense of theological, experiential education.
Was that a metaphor, or is there sometimes screaming and yelling in your classes?
It is not a metaphor.